Yep. You want to do that, Joel?
Click share.
Is it this thing?
Yep.
You want to email it to me, and then I can see if I can
Scroll it.
do the click share on my computer?
Oh, it's loading. Hold on a minute.
Yeah, that might be the case. You might have to download that app.
It's just he doesn't have the click share on his.
Here. That might.
Will they be able to see it?
Yes, they will be able to see it as well because we have another monitor over here.
Well, I didn't find it. Does it see it on this thing? It's not those, right?
Oh no, Kelly. So Kelly, if you can email it to me.
She's doing it right now.
Oh, okay. So yeah, once they email it,
Liz, are you emailing both things? Liz, you're emailing both things?
so then once that happens, they will put it up here, and
Recording in progress.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the Brentwood Redevelopment Corporation meeting. And this is Tuesday, July 19th. We're starting about a half a minute late due to technical problems, but I think we've got everything sorted and are ready to go. So with that, I would like to call the meeting to order, and I would ask that we please call the roll.
Alderman Gould,
Here.
Alderman Lockmiller,
here.
Alderman Plufka,
Here.
Alderwoman Sims,
Here.
Tony Ponder,
Here.
Andy Burkemper, absent, Keith Ravenberg. Here. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 members are 6 members are present.
Great, thank you very much. And we do have a quorum, and I would like to point out that Tony Ponder is joining us via Zoom, as is John Braglione. If I pronounce your name right, I've known you for a long time, but did I get that right?
You were very close, but that's okay.
Okay, great. You're very kind. Thank you. All righty, so we would like to look at the agenda next. I'd like to have approval or any amendment to the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. We also have the minutes of the April 26th meeting, and I would take a motion for approval or any amendments to the.
Motion to approve minutes of April 26th meeting.
No further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. All right, new business. So tonight we have a presentation by Green Street Real Estate Ventures on the final submittal for the Manchester Road Corridor Development Area. So this is why we're all here, and it's really exciting to see a lot of people in the audience to come hear about this. So happy about that. The city's done a really good job, and I know other members of the Board of Aldermen and of this board have tried to get the word out so that more people could hear about this project. So we use the word final, but I don't want to make anybody nervous, right? So this is a final concept plan right now. So at our last meeting, we went over a preliminary concept plan, and now we have a final concept plan. So this is the only developer to submit to us for this proposal, and now we're considering recommending this concept plan and this developer as the preferred developer or master developer for this project. So where it goes from here, if this board were to decide that it wanted to recommend to the Board of Aldermen that we would recommend Green Street as the preferred developer for this project, and with this concept plan or final concept plan, that's just the beginning. So we need to go through that step before we even get to the nitty-gritty or any negotiations or discussions about incentives or anything like that. So there would be a package that would be worked out with the developer as far as getting that paid for, so we could have our consultants go ahead and dive into that, crunch the numbers, and then we would come up with, you know, what the impact is, and the City Board of Aldermen and everyone would start working then on negotiating. And then it has to go through this whole public process. It goes through the Board of Aldermen, and then it comes back to the 353 board to discuss that. So tonight, we're not really doing any incentives. We'll be aware of the fact that the developer is requesting those. We'll really be focusing in on the plan and the developer and following up on a lot of the issues and discussion topics that we raised at the last meeting. So, for example, there have been high-level discussions with the school district that are going on. They're very much being brought into the loop on this issue, and tonight we won't be making any decisions in that regard on that. This only kickstarts the process so we can start working on that as a city. So hopefully that makes sense as far as kind of an overview of where we're kind of going to set the table for tonight. So that said, we have a very thick and detailed book that you can also see online if you haven't read it yet. And we've also posted, I know some of us online on Facebook and social media, about the links to the Brentwood pages that have these documents that you can all review. So if you can't find them, you can contact Whitney or someone at the city later, and they'll be able to direct you and give you the link to the same big document that I have here in print in front of me. So what we're going to start with first, it's this, and then it's got addendums to it, right? But we're going to ask Green Street to come and introduce themselves again, introduce who's with them from the team, and to go through kind of the changes from the preliminary to the final to bring us up to speed, give us an overview of the project. I know they've brought boards and a lot of fancy things like that, so that'll be really helpful. But I also want to mention one other thing too, is after it goes through, if it makes it through all of the process that we just talked about, it then goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to work on all of the details of the plans, the site plans. So some things will change a little bit necessarily based on like topography and possibly a little bit with market and as things change over time. But the Planning Commission will have a lot of public meetings where everyone gets to come to those too. So you can kind of buckle your seatbelts in and come to all these meetings with us, and we'll follow it all along together. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Green Street. Oh, also, I was just suggested to make a comment, which is a very good point. So we do want to hear from everybody, so you'll have the opportunity at the end after this presentation to put questions on the record and all of that, and we'll gather the questions and do our best, maybe, you know, when you're done, to have a few of them answered tonight, what we can, and otherwise we'll make note for the future, particularly if it's something that's at a different stage from where we're at right now. So no worries, you'll get a chance to say something, but we'll start with an overview of the project and discussion of the board. That way you can get more information, which hopefully should alleviate any concerns and answer a lot of questions. Great, thank you. Great suggestion. All right, Green Street.
Good evening. We're thrilled to be back here in front of you all. We have a little technology issue, so you have to have a little patience while we work together on this. I'm Joel Oliver. I run the development group at Green Street. We brought a big group tonight because we want to be able to answer questions, as they come up. So we have Phil as our founder, and his partner is Kevin is here. Good evening. We have Liz Austin's our chief marketing officer. We have Aaron and Amanda and Matt from our development team. Katie is with Development Strategies, who's a third-party consultant that worked on the cost-benefit analysis. And then we have two folks, David and Veronica from our architecture group, HDA, are here. So hopefully we have the right people here to be able to answer questions. So I think your intro was fantastic. We're doing this presentation a little differently than usual for full transparency. What we're presenting tonight is the exact copy of the bound book that you have and what's also online. So we did not convert this into a separate presentation. We just wanted to make sure that it was as seamless as possible. So what we're going to do is make an attempt to present the main changes from the preliminary plan to what we have tonight. So that's the goal. But as I said, this is exactly what you all have seen before. So are you controlling things? Okay, so so can we go to page 4? This says executive summary at the top. Okay, I'll actually go past that. We did add a little better index to the front of this one because it's so large now. So if we go to the site plan, which is page 6. So we do have 2 printed copies here in the room just as reference points as we go through the presentation tonight. These are the same plan, one's just higher up, so you can see the full extent down to Brentwood and Hanley for context. This program now represents about 23 buildings in the total development, which is a lot of information to digest. So we tried to put it in a format that was something that could flow seamlessly. The buildings are all labeled with letters that correspond throughout the charts in the presentation. If you go to page 8, so we added in 2 oblique aerials looking down Manchester from both sides to give a sense of scale for the project. So page 8 is if you are closer to Brentwood looking down Manchester to give a sense of how these buildings kind of interact with each other a little more easily than in a flat plan. The next page is the same, just from the other angle, from the Hanley side. So hopefully that's useful to kind of provide some context. I'm going to focus on page 10 for a moment. Page 10 is the overall development plan for all 3 phases. There's a handful of small changes throughout this, but I really want to focus on 5 major changes from what we showed you the first time. In the preliminary plan, we had shown the development on the north side of Manchester as its own discrete development phase. I thought that was kind of confusing to conceptualize what that really means in reality. So what we did instead is we incorporated everything on the north side in the same phase as what's on the south side. So the table you now see is the north and south marching down Manchester. So hopefully that's a little bit easier to understand. The 4 significant changes from the preliminary plan are Building G, which is in the original plan that was shown as a commercial building that was 44,000 square feet. That is now shown as a second office building at 75,000 square feet. We have 2 separate users who have expressed significant interest in relocating their headquarters to this new development. So there are now 2 office buildings shown. So that's B and G. So those are both the same sized office buildings. That change necessitated a change to M also. M is the multifamily building that's directly below that office building. So if you recall, in the first proposal, that building was wrapped with residential units on all 4 sides and had a parking garage in the middle. There is now no residential units between the apartment building and the office building to provide more parking for that office building. So M, you think this is hard to hear, it's even harder to follow and say. So M was originally 220 units, it's now 170 units. So 50 less units, approximately 61,000 fewer square feet, but additional parking to provide for the office building. I, which is to the right, is that outdoor experiential entertainment kind of concept, which was very preliminary the first time that we presented to you. It's a more refined concept now. So the footprint of where that is very similar. It's just a little more defined in concept, which the packet goes into more details of what that means. The last change that I'd call your attention to is V, which is in the northeast corner of the site. Originally, that was shown as 2 separate buildings. It was multifamily. It's now shown as 1 building. It's the same number of units. So those are kind of, I'd say, the biggest changes, other than reordering things to incorporate the north phases into phase 1, 2, and 3. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think what you're talking about is incorporating the north and the south as you go along, kind of alleviates one of the questions that folks were struggling with, I think, at the last meeting, trying to understand how it fit together.
I agree with you completely. I agree, yes. So that was the idea, was that just makes more sense to kind of linearly, in a linear fashion, march down Manchester. So, any other questions for anybody else on this table? Okay, so the overall development cost is still right around $400 million, which is very close to where we were before.
Actually, since you said on that table, I do have one quick question on the one change. So with the one multifamily unit going from 220 to 170, refresh my memory, which one of the 170 unit multifamilies was the senior housing?
So that was a question. So we are now showing, I don't want to misstate this, which building are we currently saying is age restricted?
And K, which is closest.
Furthest to the left. So K
Okay.
would be delivered in the first phase.
Gotcha.
And the logic behind that was having that closest to the outdoor amenities in the park felt like it made the most sense from an activation standpoint.
Okay, great. And that also addresses that having been one of our long-term goals.
Yep.
And then I just was asking now because there was a change in the number in the other one, and I couldn't remember off the top of my head which one was the senior housing. So there was no change in the number of senior housing.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. So I'm going to skip over the detail on the individual phases unless there's specific questions on them. It's just a lot of information. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any that come up on those, though. Can we go to page 14, please? So just calling out, I'm not going to read this, but on page 14, under phase 3, it gives a more detailed kind of narrative of the activation of I, which is that outdoor kind of entertainment destination space. So if anybody missed that, that is where that is. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about the outdoor entertainment space in the new concept plan for that. How do you activate the pool? It seems like a lot of pools, obviously. I understand why the apartment facilities need to have amenities like that. But is that looked at as a public pool? Is that a private kind of, I mean, how does that work?
So I had the exact same question. So we were very fortunate at Green Street to have started a new operating business called Brick and Bev. The leader of Brick and Bev is a gentleman named Jake Miller. Jake was at the Cordish Company for a very long time. So he's been in the development world for about 30 years developing facilities like this. So in St. Louis, the reason that we got to know him was he was responsible for Ballpark Village. He was responsible for Power and Light in Kansas City, Texas Live. So all over the country he's done this. He's currently working on our Armory project along Highway 40 downtown, which we're very excited to open in November, so that'll be a good time. So we've worked closely with him on what this concept looks like, and as he was evaluating kind of the St. Louis County market, his input was, this is really an amenity-rich destination that we don't see other places, right? You have public pools, obviously. You know, if you belong to a country club, you can use their pool, or there's other things like that. The idea here would be that the pool feature of that would be something where you would go to the facility, you're buying food and drinks, and you have access to the pool. So it's not a public pool per se, it's an amenity kind of like a high-end hotel would be the way to think about it. So you're buying food and beverage and you get to use the pool. Good?
They have things like that, like in Greece and on the Riviera and things like that as well.
And it's lovely.
For going uptown, yes.
So I have a question regarding that. entertainment, I guess you guys are calling it destination entertainment. Was there any thought on maybe, you know, when I look at building B and K kind of towering over our destination area down there, maybe moving that over into that area where you're closer to our park?
Sure.
And almost being a sub-district of entertainment there?
So there were two thoughts that went into that. So as you hopefully noticed in the plan now, the kind of lawn area south of A, which is the microbrewery, microdistillery concept, would actually be think about it as attached to I from a programmatic standpoint. So the operation of I would also operate pop-up events in that field area. Exactly what you're saying. So when there's events at the park, when there's concerts, things going on, there would be built-in kind of utility infrastructure, maybe some outdoor kind of, not buildings, but kind of like your building in the park, where you could have something to support what you all are doing in the park. So that was the idea. The reason we didn't want to totally flip-flop those is really a density issue. So we want to start with the multifamily office hotel to start activating, getting people here, versus doing the destination entertainment without any of the density of people around it.
Okay, thank you.
I think another way to look at that too is kind of anchoring both ends of the development. And in addition to the fact that it's connected with the trails, I think you could see people migrating from one end to the other, like as part of the destination. It also might kind of encourage folks to go between. Just kind of a thought.
I mean, our hope would be this is all very fluid. When you're in the district, you don't feel like you're at a building or at a place. You're more kind of in, you know, the whole environment of the district that's being created. Anything else? Okay, can we go to page 15? So 15 is a lot of meaty information, so you'll have to give me patience, stay at the end, then we'll stop and see if there's any questions. So we've done a more refined evaluation of the zoning district from the preliminary application. Our wonderful architects have done a great job kind of digging through exactly what they've drawn and how it interplays with the Manchester Corridor commercial zoning regulations. So we have really five main issues that we address in the presentation. So I'll go through those just so that everybody that's listening can hear kind of these zoning related issues. So the rear yards on the south side of Manchester may not have site-proof fences, and the intent there is to preserve the views to and from the trail and the park. The second one is access to the GRG trail. Currently, the code specifies that every building needs to have access to that. What we are proposing is that every phase that we're developing would have access to it. So within each of the three phases, there would be an internal network. So technically, every building has access through that, but we're not creating, 12 separate kind of paved sidewalk paths that's eliminating green space. The third bullet point is that the facade orientation on certain buildings on the south side of Manchester, especially the multifamily building main facades, may not be oriented to face the principal street on which it has frontage. The reason for that is in K and in M, where we're providing parking for the office buildings and the hotels, we obviously don't want to flip-flop that where we just have a big parking garage overlooking the park. We want to have people that live in those units be able to see those view corridors. Later in the presentation, though, we do have some precedent imagery of kind of modern screening of garages where you would not know that it was a garage. So we'll get to that later in the presentation. And the last one is that the major internal circulation roadways will include some angled and parallel parking. What we found as practitioners in this space is that a lot of time people don't like to park in garages if they don't have to. People would prefer to park, parallel park or in a surface lot if they're just running in somewhere or, going to grab a bite to eat. So we want to provide those opportunities thoughtfully where we can. The fifth item would be the next section, which is about parking. So this will be further refined as we go along and be evaluated on a building by building basis. We do anticipate requesting some parking reductions, which really are catering to shared and joint parking. So that concept is outlined in the code, but we wanted to call attention to that. If you have nighttime and daytime users, for instance, we don't want to double park that. It's an incredible expense and it takes up a lot of space that can be better activated. We do also anticipate a parking variance as low as 1 space per unit for multifamily J and V on the east side of the site, which would be evaluated on a building by building basis when we get to that point. Okay, that was a lot. Are there any questions about that?
I actually have one thing.
Yep.
I definitely want to hear a lot more and have a lot more discussion about the facade orientation.
Yep.
So just to make a note, I know you said you have things coming up later about that.
Yep.
And some other things I'll go back to later on, but go ahead.
I just had a technical question that obviously may be something that you work out down the line, but when I look at your render and you have the access to the GRG, it's just a straight connection, and there's an elevation, a significant elevation drop.
Yes, absolutely.
So just
Yep.
wanted to kind of make sure that,
Yes.
you know,
You are
we have a
ab-
bunch of
you are
switchbacks or something to get
you are
down to.
absolutely correct,
Okay.
yes. As we get into the actual site layout and
Okay.
start working with the topography, the design folks have to meet ADA requirements for
Correct.
slope and things like
Yeah,
that.
okay, I just want
absolutely.
to make sure you realized that,
It could be really fun, though, if it's a really
Yes,
steep
it could
slope. I
be.
mean, the kids would love it
yeah.
It makes me think of the song, "She'll be coming around the mountain
really fast.
really fast." Sorry.
Any other questions about that? Okay, the next section actually has to do with workforce housing, which is a topic we always have a lot of questions on. So this piece is the same as what we committed to before, that 10% of the overall units that we're creating in the entire district will have a workforce housing component. Can we actually pull up that other graphic that Liz saying? So we created a graphic to try to help visualize this because it's not an easy concept, even for people who do this every day. So when we say 80% of the area median income, that is a defined kind of term. You know, so whenever the federal government does the census, they figure out what the area median income is by zip code. So in Brentwood, for example, it's around $80,000 is the area median income. So if you made 100% of the area median income, you'd make about $80,000 a year. So when we say 80% of the area median income, that would be somebody who makes about $65,000 a year would be eligible to live in those units. So I know this looks really simple, but it's a really complicated concept. So I would call what we're doing workforce housing. This slide really kind of represents the continuum of affordability is the way that we think about it. So on the left side of the screen, you have what people think is Section 8 housing, which is a federal program. It's run through local housing authorities. And on the right side of the screen, you have kind of market rate and luxury housing. So this scale is very important. So for somebody who has a Section 8 voucher, so when people say this is Section 8 housing, what that means is that somebody has to make below the poverty level. And then they have to show how much they make every year. They pay 30% of their income. And then the HUD, the federal agency, pays the rest of their rent. So what people mean when they say a Section 8 project, that would be project-based vouchers. We're gonna get in the weeds just a little bit here, just so we're on the record with it. That's very hard to do. That is not the business that we're in. It's not what we're proposing by any means. Quite frankly, I'm not sure if anybody could do that in St. Louis right now because the wait list for Section 8 vouchers is, I think, north of 5 years long. So if you go next, who's the next for people who are in extreme need? You have LIHTC, which is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program that was codified into the IRS tax code under the Reagan administration. That's a federally administered tax credit program for developers to develop housing that's heavily subsidized via tax credits for people who make 60% of the area median income. So to live there, you have to make 60% of that $80,000 number that we talked about. It's an extremely competitive program. It's run by a state agency in Jeff City. That's also not our business. We don't do that. There's developers who do. They're very good at it. It fills a very important need in our society. What we view as really missing in society in general is this workforce housing piece. And really that's targeted towards when we go talk to communities, and this happens all over the country, where we talk to school districts that have a hard time hiring people because people don't want to drive 30 minutes, or first responders, or people who are working at hospitals but aren't doctors or nurses. So that's really what that is intended to do. That's not a subsidized program. There's no tax credits. That's not run by HUD. It's just a program that we've been able to kind of innovatively figure out how to finance to meet needs in communities. Then obviously on the next end is just unrestricted market rate, luxury housing, whatever you want to call it. I could charge $1 million a unit. Nobody's going to pay it, right? But I can do whatever I want. So what we believe is the best approach in master planned communities like this is really have a healthy mix of people. Provide all of those options. Provide options that are age restricted for people who want to age in place in their community. Provide options for, a 22-year-old right out of school that wants to work in the Brentwood schools would be able to live here if they chose to, or a server at a restaurant could choose to live here. So I hope that makes a little more sense. Are there any questions about that piece specifically that I could clarify?
Alderman Plevka?
Thank you. So if the vision is that 10% of the of the housing units will be workforce housing. That means 66, 67 units?
Yeah, around there.
But then I notice in the way that you wrote this, it says one of the multifamily buildings will be included workforce housing units. Do you intend to put all 60 into one of the buildings?
It really is a financing structure question. We could do it either way. We've done it both ways. We know we obviously can't put it in the age-restricted building because that causes some issues. So then you have 3 buildings left over to kind of decide how you do that. So programmatically, I'm not sure that we know that yet. Sure, a conversation if the city has a thought or a preference.
Okay, going back to your initial thoughts with regard to the rolling nature of this development, that it's gonna run from west to east. Do you anticipate the workforce piece being part in that first phase, the second phase, the third phase?
So if K would be the age-restricted building, so it wouldn't be that, because we wouldn't
Okay.
want to limit that to that age classification of people. So then it would be a candidate for M, J, or V,
Okay, so it would be at least in phase 2 and perhaps in phase 3.
potentially, sure. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And that's absolutely a conversation that we'll have with the city if the city has a thought preference there.
And
Thank you.
I want to actually follow up on that before we go to Alderman Lockmiller. So looking at the workforce housing, there's 10%. I know that one of your other developments you have in the back of, as the examples of workforce housing that you've done, has 51% or 168 units, I believe. I don't know if that other development had the kind of, for lack of a better word, but senior housing or age-restricted housing like this one does. And when we look at the addition of the, if we take the workforce housing and the age-restricted housing together, it brings it up to like 33 or 34%. And there, I've kind of heard some discussion that maybe like 10% on workforce housing was maybe a little bit low. And I wanted to kind of get your feedback and thought process about that, and maybe kind of how the two tie in percentage-wise compared to what you've done in some other areas, understanding that the workforce housing is important, but I know for our community, and we talked about at the last meeting, the age-restricted housing to give our seniors or folks who are a little bit further along on the continuum an option to move out of their homes and then turning those over for young families and the schools and whatnot.
Sure. It's absolutely a conversation. I would tell you it's a different conversation with every city, every community. It's really driven by needs and desires locally. So, you know, we're working with a city in the Northwest right now, and 10% was the threshold, you know, and that was a huge win for them, right? Because really nobody's doing it otherwise. You know, you have the people on the left side of the continuum that develop housing for people in need that have these federal subsidy programs. It's a little easier for them because it's what they do all day, right? It's kind of the process that they follow. You know, we've been innovative in how we finance being able to have this. So we're absolutely open to having the conversation with the city when we get to that point. You know, it's there's absolutely not a cookie cutter for how to provide this.
So you kind of did it based on another project, but not necessarily, it's not cut in stone, or there isn't some like large driving reason for why you thought it should be X.
Just looking at the density of the overall units, to give you an example, in Missouri, if you're doing a low-income housing tax credit project as an example, those really never can exceed 50 units. There's a nuance that it can be more than that under certain conditions. It's complicated. Generally speaking, you're gonna get about 50 units of 60% AMI housing, and that's very hard to do. That's a struggle. So, you know, we look at new housing developments in general in St. Louis County, and we would say, you know, in that 67 unit range, that's equivalent to kind of a normal size apartment building now. So delivering an apartment building that meets that need without any of these kind of onerous tax credits or subsidy programs is a pretty big win for most cities. But we're absolutely open to having the conversation.
Okay, great. I just wanted, because it had come up and I'd kind of heard some comments, so I just wanted to address it in some way. And of course, again, we're talking about that 80 to 100% of AMI. So even though you keep bringing up as examples for us to kind of understand how concepts work under some of the other programs, just remember for the audience and for everyone on the board, we're not talking about those projects here. This is the workforce housing, which are like the teachers that.
Yeah, so the project you're talking about in Forest Park Southeast is called Union at the Grove, that half of the units are at 80% AMI. And really the driving force, just as an example behind that project, was Washington University's redevelopment agency owned all of that land. So they did an RFP, they were trying to achieve something, right? Part of what they were trying to achieve is they have a lot of people that work at the hospitals and the universities, and a lot of people coming into Cortex, and they just needed more housing options, right? So that project specifically is partially subsidized through how they invested equity in the project, right? That allowed us to do more than we usually would. So it's just part of the give and take of how it always works.
And that makes sense, and that was something else I'd wondered about, unique to what they were serving, like around.
Yep.
Just like our senior housing needs are probably a little different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm gonna go to Alderman Lockmiller.
Well, Alderman Plefka stole my question, so we'll move along.
Yes. Keith, sorry.
So I'm still trying to understand this workforce housing. At the last presentation, you started my understanding, but I'm still working on it. In the presentation on the page you just had up, I was struck by something. You said workforce housing issues are a problem nationwide, and which made me think about places like Seattle and Silicon Valley and Manhattan, where price of places to stay is, I understand, is way out of control.
Sure.
I didn't really perceive that we had that much of a problem in the St. Louis area, but maybe you can illuminate me a little
Sure.
bit on that.
No, that's a great question.
I mean, do we need it?
Yeah, well, so I'll give you some examples. So some other markets where we're currently working on this that are relatively comparable to St. Louis County. So to Brentwood also as part of that bigger dynamic would be like Memphis, Northwest Arkansas, Colorado Springs, Madison, Wisconsin. You know, the first one we did was actually in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And that's because you have a bunch of huge manufacturers there that were busing people 45 minutes every day from Milwaukee, right? So you have two problems. You either have really old rental stock that is maybe not appropriate for whatever your user base is, be that families, people aging in place, whatever it is. So, and if somebody's gonna come in and build something brand new and it's not a subsidized program, like we talked about, they're gonna charge the absolute top of the market. They're gonna charge as much as they can, right? It's a free market system. So, St. Louis is kind of interesting, right? Because you could hire a teacher in the Brentwood School District who could say, okay, well, maybe I can't afford to rent these brand new whiz-bang beautiful apartments, but I can drive 10 minutes away to another municipality. That's true, you could do that. I think my pushback would be, we always like to stress that we all want to invest in the sense of community, right? And that means different things to different people. But right? If you work in an area, if you have kids, you may want your kids to go to that school district, as an example, where you work and you live and you do these things. Not everybody chooses to do that, but it's great to have the option of doing it. You know, so for this development, as an example, I think the rents that we're talking about are a 15 to 20% discount. So if you were living in one of these workforce housing units, you might be right next door to a full market rate unit that's not a workforce unit, and that person who's qualifying to live in that unit, their rent's about 20% less, right? So if you're only making $60,000 a year, that 20% could matter.
The numbers you said, 80,000 was the average in Brentwood?
That's
and
the 100%
So
median,
60% of that is 64,000?
That's right.
You know, a new teacher who just out of college makes 44,000, I think, something like that. So what does that mean? Does that
So that's for
mean
a two-person household, that $64,000 number.
two-person? How about for a one-person household?
Do you have those numbers?
I think it was about 45.
About 45,000 for a single.
I mean, we can look it up. Okay.
That's all data that's published by HUD, so we could pull that and tell you what it is.
I don't know that stuff. So that what that bottom line means is they get a 15% discount off the rent.
Which could be a couple $100 a month, and if you're making $45,000 to $60,000 a year, that could, you know, be impactful to your grocery bill.
Maybe you'll come back to how this whole scheme works with the discounts at some point again, and my thick skull will allow it in.
Yeah, we could do a whole dissertation on it. It's pretty interesting.
I'll take your word for it.
You'd get college credit for it. I mean,
I'm sorry?
you'd get college credit for it.
Really?
So we have two more questions, Alderman Gould.
Yeah, actually, I know Tony had,
I was gonna go to Tony next.
let's
Was
go,
she-
I mean,
to her?
go ahead and go to her.
Okay, Tony? And Whitney's helping me see the
Hi,
little
good
hand.
evening. Good evening. I just have a question. How is the workforce housing marketed? I know you talked earlier about like the Wash U, which that seemed to be a good fit. And I know Section 8 is normally marketed in a specific way of Section 8, and often the tax credit ones are as well. So how is this marketed to potential tenants?
Yeah, so you're right, it's different in every situation, it's different in every market. As a counter example to what we're doing in the Grove, you know, the other project in Wisconsin, for example, we were working directly with a lot of the large businesses that were in town, whose employee base was a fit for that, which is why we went there in the first place. So working with their HR departments, we almost always reach out to the local school district, and first responders are a fit for that, but it's very market specific. And fortunately, we have our own property management group that manages our multifamily facilities, so they know how to do it and can replicate it and not have to teach somebody new every time.
And I think, someone can correct me, but I think for our school district, if you're employed at the district, I think as a teacher, I think your kids are allowed to attend.
That is
even
pretty,
if you live in the district.
that is pretty normal in St. Louis County.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would be more curious to get more information in detail on how it's gonna be marketed and learned about.
Thank you. Is that it, Tony, for at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, thank you.
And I would also say one of the things we talked about that ties into this, and it's something that you just mentioned, Joel, is that you're going to be owning and operating. It's not that you're just building it and selling off all the buildings, like what you just said there, and you might repeat it again, the part about your own property managers.
Yeah. So one of our sister companies is Green Street Management. You know, what we found early on is that it's great if we develop and build a great product, but it's that every day of dealing with tenants, and it really takes a special touch of like how you're doing the marketing, how you're interfacing with tenants. And that's really just the most easily controlled if it was our own company. So we have a staff of people that manage those facilities, and yes, the intention is to own versus being a merchant builder where somebody just comes in and builds something and immediately sells it.
Thank you, and that's something based on the experience that I've had on the planning commission for longer probably than I care to admit right now, that when we've had different projects that has been particularly successful as far as an approach to resolve some of the potential concerns that we've had people have over the years.
Yeah, and I think that's an important differentiator, us being from St. Louis. You know, we're here. The worst thing we can do is come into Brentwood and do a terrible job, right? I mean, that's a really good way to injure your business very quickly. So we have a very vested interest in doing it correctly and doing what we say we'll do.
Because you couldn't put our pretty pictures in the back of your next book then.
Right.
Anyway, I digress. I'm just kidding. Alderman Gould.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I did have a couple of clarification questions on the workforce housing. I think the last time you presented, we talked about it being sort of mixed in with all of the units that are appropriate for that, obviously not in the age restricted. And that appealed to me in a sense that, you know, you don't have, oh, that's the units that are the workforce housing kind of units, right? And what I see in the plan, and I guess I'm a little concerned about is potentially that it now sits in the third phase and only in one of the places. So I just want to make sure that we understand how that's being implemented, and I'd like to have a sense for, are those actually differently designed units, or are they parity units to everything in the building? You just get
That's right.
one that's available.
They're exactly the same, and you would never have any idea of,
Okay.
unless you told your neighbor. I mean, for example, so Building M is an example, which is in phase 2 below the office building. That building has 170 units in it. So say you put all 67 units in that building, you would still have 103 units that are market rate, right? So there's not a way to do like a full concentration, which part of the reason this says that they may be in one building was really more geared towards that 50% in one building, which is what we've done in other places. It's definitely open to conversation. I'll tell you, it's very complicated to finance the workforce housing projects because it's just a very different structure.
That was gonna be my question, is if you spread them out and they're in different phases, does it make it difficult to finance
It's
and build?
doable, it just makes it more difficult.
Okay.
And if the city feels strongly, it's absolutely a point to discuss, as we get to that point.
And then you talked about reacting to market changes. I mean, is that something that either grows or shrinks over time as far as the number, percentage of units that are allowed?
So our development agreement with you would stipulate what that number is.
Okay, and that would be a fixed thing moving forward, okay.
And I guess that wouldn't preclude you if you wanted to do more workforce housing, would it?
No.
Like, because you could always add more if there was a demand, just because you can change your rents and have your rent set however you want.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One
Alderman-
clarification, Keith, I did find my note. So one person's 53,200.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I did have one follow-up. I mean, I do think that when you talk about creating a sense of community, one thing that we have noticed with Brentwood and probably other municipalities that are surrounding is that the housing stock with infill housing and whatever starts increasing in cost and pushes out some families that probably were part of the community or maybe couldn't afford to live here if they were trying to get into the community now. So I do think that there is some merit to having, a mixture in affordability as some of our home stock starts to increase in cost.
Yeah.
I just wanted to put that out there, that I do think that we have to look at it very carefully, and we want to make sure that there's a good balance. As far as a sense of community goes, one thing that I asked about last is so being surprised at the number of units in the plan, and really, when we talked about redevelopment, I kind of looked at it as mostly as a place for the community that exists, not building a community that then can be feeding that district. Can you speak to, from a developer standpoint, why you feel we need this many units infused into the district, and why we're not seeing more retail or restaurants, and how that might, and how the mixed use of some of these units might allow for some of those other amenities like restaurants and smaller boutique retail.
Yes, I'd say there's two kind of very different answers to the question that are equally important. The first is the concentration of people is really important for the overall survival, right? If you don't have people and you just have people come at night and they go to dinner and leave, right? Like, you don't have that kind of all the time activation, which is very important to make the whole thing thrive. I think Brentwood is very similar to a lot of other places. That you have a finite amount of housing stock, right? So if you're somebody who wants to age in place and leave your home but stay in Brentwood, this will give you an opportunity, but then have an opportunity for somebody else to buy your house. My oldest is going to college in 4 weeks. And one thought we have is, we live in Webster, and when he graduates in 4 years, if he wants to move back to Webster, there's not really an option. Like, that's something that as a 22-year-old, he'd be able to rent an apartment and afford that, right? So I think we're seeing that as a bigger problem in the St. Louis region, is we don't have these options. So it provides kind of the bookends, right? Younger people who may be starting in their career, and you might have people who want to age in place out of their home. So I think creating that diversity of options is really important, and then activating the whole corridor kind of all day.
I mean, as far as in order to make it profitable for you to do a development like this, is it critical to have kind of a number of units to have a recurring revenue, or?
Yeah, so I didn't answer your second question.
Yeah.
The second question on the retail and restaurant piece is, we're very sensitive in any community we go to. What you don't want to do is steal from other parts of your town, right? St. Louis is notorious for municipalities stealing from each other, right? Is that good for the region? I don't probably think so, but it happens, right? So if I have a bunch of retail uses along here and I just steal uses from Eager or Hanley or Brentwood, right? It's kind of a net zero for you. So evaluating the overall market and looking, okay, what's kind of missing? What can we do to complement what's happening, right? If we give you a really great kind of downtown feeling that provides these ancillary services, That's what felt like really was additive to the city as a whole. Kind of the minimum threshold, it's a tough question, not really. I mean, the general rule of thumb that I say is we're not usually going to do an apartment building project that's less than 200-ish units. That's kind of a threshold. Obviously, that's not an issue here. We're over that number. It's really just kind of thoughtfully evaluating what we think complements the overall city.
And you make one follow-up on that. You may get to it actually, but can you define the mixed-use buildings and what mixed use really means? Because sometimes I think mixed use, I mean, I think businesses and residential mixed in, but I don't see that here in your plan. Mixed-use building seems to be mostly commercial.
Yeah, really the opportunity where you would have to do that would be D on the south side, which is right above the townhouses. It's really a pretty de minimis amount of square footage, so if you were to add some second floor units, in theory, you could do that. That's programmatically not what we're thinking right now. It's obviously a pretty exhaustive effort to go to the market and really start talking to users, who wants to be here, who's the right fit for the overall district, right? You don't want to go out and just like start signing leases with anybody who wants to put their, their placard outside. So I think that could be a mix of kind of office service kind of uses, restaurants, retail, those kind of things.
Thank you, Alderman Gold. So it's more like the whole development is like a mixed use when you take it together as opposed to a building.
It truly is, that's right, that's right.
Alderman Leckmiller?
Joel, of the 500 or so non-age restrictive units, do you guys have a breakdown yet? How many are 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms?
I don't think we do we, David? No, not off the top, not that I'm prepared to say.
Okay. And then on the senior building, that's an age-in-place building, it's not skilled or...
That's right. So we view it as, it's a continuum, right? So you have two definitions of age-restricted housing. This will offend everyone, I'm sorry. They're either 55 or older or 62 or older. By and large, most people do the 55 or older. There's kind of very strict reasons you do that. So it'd be people who are 55 or older. It would not be on that continuum of care, which would be skilled nursing, memory care. It would not be that. It'd be more active seniors.
I'll be parking my chair there after this meeting.
Exactly.
I was going to say I've got about 3 more months to be eligible, right?
I told you that was a meaty slide. Any more questions on that one?
I do have, since we're talking about the age-restricted housing, I keep wanting to call it senior housing. Oh my God, I'm not a senior yet. But on that, we had talked the last time as far as what the market was for that and who you were trying to attract. And we had talked about the fact that Clayton has a lot of very expensive, more like age-restricted or geared towards senior-type housing. And it's a different market. Then I think what a lot of us had been looking for, hoping for, like we've been trying to get some sort of thing like this for over 20 years. And when you do that, and we've talked, and several people have too, when you have about the folks who are, maybe they don't want to take care of their home anymore, they don't want to have those responsibilities, and they sell their home where they've lived here for 30 years or 50 years or whatever, and turn that over, to young professionals or young couple or whatnot, and they move into this. So they may not be of the mindset of wanting to spend the high amount of money that you would, like, let's say for Clayton, right. Like something that is more reasonably priced, I guess, for the folks who would be moving out of their homes in Brentwood and hoping to still stay in a less maintenance environment in Brentwood for a while until such time as if they would ever need the additional kind of care that Alderman Lockmiller mentioned. So in your documents, you talk about high-end amenities related to this particular building that would have the age-restricted housing. So when you mention the words high-end amenities can cost money, and things that cost more money cost more rent. So what I'm looking for is, I don't know if you can give us an idea of what your rent would be yet at this point. It's a little premature for that type, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Sure. Like, it doesn't really do us much good if we don't have age-restricted housing that people in our community can actually afford to live in.
Yep, I think it's a great question. The amenity-rich piece of what we develop is actually a critical piece of that community piece of what we're trying to do, right? You want to create opportunities where people go out of their apartment and go actually do stuff together. So that's a critical piece. I'm not prepared to tell you a rent number. What I would tell you, though, kind of programmatically from a financing standpoint, we're not looking at that building as different than kind of standard market rate rents. So, we're not applying a large premium. There are developers who specialize in developing exactly what you're saying, and it is a very premium price tag that's targeted to a very specific clientele. That's not what we're envisioning here.
Great, thank you very much.
Unless you want us to, I guess we could, but that's not what we were picturing.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I know we still are going through the overview of the differences and the changes from the last time, so does anyone have any specific questions on these topics? Otherwise, we'll have Joel move ahead. I did ask Whitney Kelly to let you guys know that you should bring your, blankets and snacks and everything and the lawn chairs in case you were going to be here for a while.
That's great. No, I appreciate that. Kevin brought a cooler of beer. So.
Excellent.
Page 16. I'm just going to touch on this just really quickly, just because this wasn't, I don't think, explicitly last time. Relocation, that piece is very important to us. We made allusions last time that we were hiring this great gentleman here, Aaron, who came to us from Bedrock in Detroit, and he was their director of acquisitions. So that's what he lived and breathed there, was dealing with very difficult, very complicated land acquisitions, following federal guidelines on relocation, working with the city of Detroit on the things that were in place. So now you get to actually meet him. We were just talking about him like he was a mysterious person before. So we're thrilled to have him. It's a great project. He really has his head in it. So that piece is really important to the community, to the city, to everybody here, and it's front of mind. Let's go to page 17,
I have
please.
just a real quick follow-up on that. I noticed too in the plan that you talked about some parcels that are existing, obviously that pretty much is the Navigate building that's there, that's represented. But, obviously there are businesses that are part of the community that are existing, and, definitely would love your input on how you foresee this plan fitting with maybe retaining, not just relocating, working to relocate businesses, but actually retaining some of those businesses.
I would tell you one of Phil's greatest wizard tricks is exactly that. And it's working with people who are in a facility that's maybe for whatever reason not the exact right thing for them. So it's like a big chess game, moving people around and trying to really create the best situation for people. That's really a daunting task, right? If you're a widget maker and you've been making widgets in your facilities for 20, 30 years, the thought of moving to a new widget factory is incomprehensible, right? So having somebody like us who can come along and help people with that's really important. Now, there's some people who may not want to move, that their widget factory is just great and they have no desire to move. The nice thing about the way this plan is phased, not only kind of down Manchester, but on the north and south side, it really gives us a very wide canvas to work with people to figure out how to incorporate them here. And somebody may say, I don't want to pay the rents that I need to be in this beautiful new downtown Brentwood section, but I want to stay in Brentwood. Well, we have the expertise to go find maybe somewhere else in Brentwood to help them move to, right? So being practitioners kind of soup to nuts in the process allows us to work with people to do that.
Good question.
I called you a wizard in a nice way. Okay, on page 17, we expounded under the city participation and incentive. I just want to say it out loud so it's on the record for folks. So I'm just going to read directly from here, from the second paragraph. So he said, our plan assumes that the developer, us, that we'll be able to acquire the existing city, BRC, or state-owned land within the development area outside of the floodplain at no cost to the developer. It's the same thing we talked about before. So that has not changed. I believe the cost-benefit analysis helps explain why that makes sense. So we'll get to that later. And then the site acquisition will occur as we march down the road. So that's an important piece. We would also like an open dialogue with the city and BRC on the use of eminent domain if needed. Obviously, no developer ever wants to use eminent domain. It's a pain in the butt, it's expensive, it makes people unhappy, but it is an incentive that's on the table, so.
And let's clarify, your document says not for single family.
Absolutely.
That's very important for
Absolutely.
everyone to understand,
Absolutely.
not to be used for single family.
Also, real estate tax abatement and area-wide community improvement district, which is also called a CID, a transportation development district, which is called a TID, the use of new market tax credits and Chapter 100 bonds, which abate sales tax on construction materials. I will say it's very important, though, we're not just asking for a huge blank check. These are tools that we're saying we will likely need access to, but they're evaluated on a building-by-building case, and the city has ultimate control over all of those things.
And as we go into maybe a few questions here just for a moment, I want to also go back to the fact that just for everyone's benefit tonight, we're not making any decisions on the incentives or any recommendations on the specifics of the incentives tonight. We're going to be looking to make a recommendation potentially on a preferred developer and a final concept plan, using the word final loosely, right? But a concept plan, not the site plans. And then that will enable a negotiation between the city, the Board of Aldermen, and the developer to pay for the analysis that we need in order to begin the discussions about the incentives. We have to have that information from our consultants first before we can really do that good evaluation. So with that said, Alderman Plufka.
And can I add one thing? And the reason I'm specifically calling out certain things for the public's benefit is there are certain criteria in the RFP response. So we want to make sure that we were responsive to every data point that was asked for. This is one that was specifically requested.
You're commended for including it. Yeah, we expected it to be in here. I just didn't want people to think
absolutely.
that this is like to panic right now, that we have to get into the total nuts and bolts. Like, we're going to be able to dive into this a lot yet to come.
They shouldn't panic later either.
Yeah, no panicking. No
panicking.
panicking. All right.
Thanks. I want to speak up at this juncture. So we committed $90 million of taxpayers' money to the area surrounding this development. $5 million playground, an event center, a connection to the GRG, flood abatement, and all of that. And I've read and I've heard that you've had some, let's just say difficult, some would even say unfair experiences with other municipalities, both in the city and the county, having to do with this issue, having to do with the implementation of an incentive program and then having it pulled out from under you. So I just want you to know, and I'm speaking only for myself, and I know there are other elected officials on this board, but I'm telling you right now, we did 90% of the heavy lifting here. And if you're going to be asking us for abatements, whether it's sales tax on the construction, whether it is TDDs, whether it is the implementation of a district, any of that stuff, you're going to have to be awfully creative and awfully persuasive for me personally to want to go ahead and provide you those things. Because I will tell you, it's going to have to be things like things that further enhance the public safety for the citizens of Brentwood. We spent a lot of money making this stretch of roadway safer for the people that live and work down there. And we have other needs, and this development is going to create further needs: police protection, fire and rescue protection. We're going to need to know that you're interested or willing in your infrastructure investment as that part of this project, that you're willing to put in a substation, a police substation, that you're willing to devote square footage to an area where we can store emergency vehicles that are being used in the Brentwood-bound area, that you're willing to commit money to a trust fund for additional police officers or additional firefighters or things like that, or greater connectivity of the trail system that's we're already putting in place. You talked about connecting your phases to the trail system, and I think that's fantastic. But I will tell you that there's going to have to be some persuasive evidence that this project greatly enhances what we've already done here before I'm going to be willing to say to my constituents, we're going to forego the tax increment, the increase provided by this development for a period of 10 years, and we're going to give that back to the developer because they did ABC. I mean, I'm going to need to be able to finish that sentence for them and do it credibly.
As an elected official, I would hope so, right? It's incumbent on you to do that. I think the good news is, you're a consultant in PGAV, and then, we have development strategies on our behalf. It's what they live and breathe every day, right? So but you don't want to hear me say it, right? You have the cost-benefit analysis that was prepared by them, and then you'll have PGAV go through that, right?
Very good.
At the end of the day, if the incentives aren't a net positive to the city, you wouldn't approve it, right? You've created a beautiful space here. There's no question about it. The reality is it's about $25 million worth of dirt to acquire still, right? Structured parking's about $30,000 a stall now. So, right, we want overflow parking for the park, it's $30,000 a stall is what it costs to do that. So we want to create all of these wonderful amenities for people to age in place and to do things, right? And then our job is, right, it's put together a scenario that makes sense for everybody. And you're exactly right. If it's not a compelling story, you'd say, see you later.
I mean, the only reason I'm speaking up now is I've read the articles and I've seen, you know, the experiences that you guys have had, and I think good faith experience you guys have had where you've had something in place and it's been pulled out, and I don't want that experience to be Brentwood. I want you to understand going in exactly where our mindset is.
Sure.
At least my mindset.
Yeah, and we look forward to engaging in that dialogue with the city, right? Because there's things you can change and there's things you can do to reduce cost and say, okay, if we're gonna forego that benefit, then you don't get any parking, right? Like, there's trades and balances, and it's
Right.
just part of the negotiation.
Thank you.
That's a
Thank
great
you.
segue to the next slide, though.
Yeah. Well, before you go there, John on the Zoom had either a question or something to contribute.
I think it's important to point out that the length of time that it has taken to get just to this point with a firm proposal on the table meant that the ability to use eminent domain under the Chapter 353 designation that the Redevelopment Corporation submitted the original development plan for and was ultimately approved by the board, essentially has to be renewed because the statute has timing on the eminent domain potential use. And we are in the process right now. I just submitted draft documents to the city's legal counsel and to Whitney and Bola that will update that qualifications analysis to allow that to allow the designation to be renewed. It's as is pointed out, we see very little use in development projects of eminent domain anymore because Joel hit the nail on the head. It's expensive, it's time consuming, it's everything nobody wants to do. However, having said that, we think it's important that you not lose that potential. And so there will be a document that I think, Whitney, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that document has to go back through you guys as did the original one. And by the way, it does not include, in fact, it excludes most of the property that has been acquired and is being used for the flood mitigation and trails and all that stuff. It focuses on the properties that, in essence, are remaining. So it will be a smaller area than the one that was originally designated.
Thank you, John, and that makes sense. And two things, we're talking about non-residential properties when we have this discussion. And the other thing is, John, I'm going to have you do a little bit more of an introduction so folks know who you are, what your role is with the city, and all of that, because obviously we turn to you for some expertise on different things, and not everyone is familiar with your extensive credentials.
Well, I'll be very, very brief. We have been, our firm, PGAB Planners, has been your planning consultants, well, really planning and economic development since sometime in the 90s. And so we advise the city on a lot of things, including this kind of stuff. And the work that we've done has involved any number of folks from our firm, but I have been the one person who's sort of been the project manager of most of that with all of the knowledge of what has gone before and how how Brentwood's really accomplished some unbelievable things for a city of its size. And I'm glad to say that I think we've helped with that.
Definitely. Thank you very much, John. And I also want to thank Alderman Plufka for bringing up those points as well. And I think that's part of what we're going to see as we go forward. I mean, this is one member of the Board of Aldermen, and there's going to be negotiations and discussions. This is just the beginning. So it's all going to be lots of communication, trying to come up with a partnership mix that makes sense for all the needs for the city, that allows the developer to do what they do, and hopefully we can all come to an agreement. But again, this will just kickstart the process. Alderman Gold.
Before we move to the summary benefits, I know you want to continue moving on, and I appreciate that. So I appreciate you taking the time to allow us to interject. Agree with Alderman Plufka on majority of what he was saying, so I'm glad he said it as well. The only other thing that I wanted to put a finer point on is the fact that city-owned property, MoDOT-owned property that will eventually be, that was for, Manchester Road redevelopment work, that's not just property that we have, that's property we've spent a lot of taxpayer money to acquire. One significant piece within probably phase 2 is where our Public Works Department sits. So, there's going to be some real, those aren't just invaluable or not very valuable type of pieces of property that we can say, okay, yeah, go ahead and, doesn't really impact us much. There's a real cost to the city in having to then relocate. That would be a relocation of our services department. So I just want to make sure that those things are sort of thought through before we start to get into discussions of whether or not those are, it's the right decision from a cost breakdown to just turn those over at no cost.
And it's an important part of the negotiation. I mean, the reality, and you all fortunately know this because you're a sophisticated city that actually works with large development. And that's not something we always see. So it's nice to work in a city where we can have those dialogues in a thoughtful, meaningful way. It goes without saying, obviously for a $400 million project, Kevin and Phil aren't writing a $400 million check, right? So we have to have a financeable project, and that's working with lenders, and that's working with outside investors, right? So for a $400 million project, I'll probably need $80 to $100 million of cash equity. So at the end of the day, right, we have a beautiful plan. It has to be financeable. So the reason we have a consultant in development strategies, the reason you have a consultant in PGAV, it's very transparent, right? If we're asking for something and it's just absolutely ludicrous returns, PGAV would tell you that. And you'd say, this is ridiculous. They'd also tell you, without that incentive, it's not a financeable project. And we'd say, okay, well, it's not going to work. It can just stay what it is now, right? I mean, that's the other option. The good news is it's really just working together, and I think your all's view is that you're looking for a partner and a developer is really the key, right? And to have a really open dialogue. So we love that.
And I think the interesting thing that you mentioned is that any incentives that you will request will be on it's not a development district-wide incentive. It's a building by building, correct?
I believe that is how it would work, or would it be by RPA?
We modeled it by RPA,
Yeah.
there was an understanding that it
Pull it
could
out.
be by building.
So what she said is development strategies did model it, and what you have in your packet there is by each of the 3 RPAs.
Oh, okay.
But that it could be broken down by
RPA meaning the phases
the
that
3 individual phases.
Thank you.
So on page 18 is the summary of the cost benefit analysis. You have the really big fat addendum is attached to it, and I believe it's out there for the public to see also. We summarized it to kind of the main salient points. I'm going to read this because I think it's easier than me trying to summarize it. So the developer anticipates using a Chapter 353 tax abatement of 90% of the improved commercial and residential property taxes and commercial surcharge for the first 10 years of the project, as well as a 1% sales tax through a CID, which is a community improvement district. A summary of benefits for the first 25 years of the projects highlighted below. So assuming the incentives that we have baked into the deal, we believe for it to be a financeable project, results in that the project would generate a total of $266.3 million in new revenue over the first 25 years. That includes $41.7 million to the local taxing jurisdiction and $51.6 million to the Brentwood School District. So while there is a cost to the subsidies, there's a greater benefit to the city. We also had them do an exercise to answer the question, how many students would be added to the district. I'm going to cover that on the next slide. And then given the scale of the project, we estimate that that would create 1,200 construction jobs and the opportunity for 1,200 post-construction jobs. That number is important to remember that it currently shows 2 office buildings. So that's not, people working at retail or kind of service facilities. That includes people working in an office environment. If we go to page 19, we could talk specifically about the students, and I can go back to 18.
Before we go and talk about the students, just one question to make sure I understand. So that not to get into the weeds at all, but 266.3 million. So when I was reading the development strategies menu, they were talking about a 266.3 million build or a 57.1 million if there was no build, so that it would be a net of 209.2 million. So I just want to make sure, like, as if you built something versus if it went along its happy way. Yeah, so
Sorry.
I don't know, the number 266, should that be 209?
It should.
Okay.
So I'm Katie Medlin. I'm a senior associate with Development Strategies. So the 266.3 is the build scenario, and that essentially is if you build everything as they've shown over all 3 phases. And then we also modeled a separate scenario, a no build, basically assuming what is there now will basically continue to be there with nominal inflationary growth rates over 25 years. So yes, the 209.3 is the new net revenues
Okay, thank
over
you.
time.
Good catch, my apologies.
Which is a lot of money, like, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
either
not
way.
like, but I just wanted to make sure, like, if anybody had looked at that too, that I just wanted to clarify.
So I just wanted to clarify too, it's, written into the cost benefit analysis. What we're assuming is abatement only for the first 10 years at 90%, and thereafter there is no abatement. But under 353, you have the 25-year window, so we chose to show that full window, but I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that.
And that is important too, because you could have asked for abatement for a lot longer of a period of time, but the actual abatement period that you're requesting is 10 years.
Is shorter, yes, than what is allowed.
The SID and the TID are self.
Right, the SID and the TID are self-imposed. They will be managed by a separate board. Oh,
Right, and go ahead, Alderman Plefka.
I just wanted to ask a clarification on that. The 10 years begins at the end of phase 3, or the 10 years begins at the beginning of phase 1?
the 10 years begins technically at the beginning of each RPA, and that's when ownership is transferred.
So technically, from the day 1 of the project, we're actually talking 13 years of abatement.
So it's by RPA, so it's not 13, so say RPA 1 starts tomorrow. It's not
Right.
going to say it starts tomorrow. It's 10 years for RPA 1 from tomorrow. RPA 2 starts a year from now. It's 10 years from then. There'll only be 9 years left on RPA 1 at that point.
Right, but 11 years from now, that second one you just mentioned would end.
Right,
And if the third
Right.
one,
right. So
started
it's kind
a
of
year
a
after
rolling
that.
clock. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
exactly.
Rolling was the word I was going to use to describe it, and that kind of reminds me of another development we had too, I think, but where part of it comes, and then, so part of it on the other end of the spectrum comes back to the full amount before the other parts of the project do, just depending on
Right.
what time they start.
Right, and just so you're all clear, the tables that are included in this report, these are just the gross numbers. These aren't present value numbers. These are just the numbers over time. We can go in and calculate the present value if you want to see that, but typically we just report the full amount over time.
And we'll be able to get into the weeds like a lot with that after we get PGAV's report and analysis too, and they may have some preferences as well.
Exactly.
Thank you, and what was your name, Katie?
Katie Medlin.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Joel, and then I know you wanted to go into the school district
Oh, good,
portion. We
good, good.
segued on you.
That's why we bring experts though, so they're much better than me. Any other questions on that, or can I go on to the school part?
Who does?
Tony does.
Oh, Tony has a question or a comment.
Sorry, thank you. And that number assumes full occupancy for all of the phases? The 250, the 209?
Yes, so that, well, full occupancy in terms of property taxes, in terms of sales taxes generated, I believe we assume a 5 to 10% vacancy rate. So that we're baking in some vacancy for the sales tax generating property at any given time.
Okay. And is that 5 to 10%, is that typical, is that a typical bake?
Yeah,
Or-
generally, yes, for a healthy, thriving district, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Stay up for the schools.
You can come back. It's good. You get your steps in. So it was requested that we do a forecast on the potential number of students that we would see based kind of programmatically and the overall plan. So we had development strategies also do that. So it's kind of a disinterested third party using their data. So page 19, is that right? So page 19 has a very detailed breakdown. Katie can definitely answer any questions if you have any. The conclusion of their research is that we had anticipated a total of 12 to 18 new students in the Brentwood School District. Do remember that's K through 12. So that wouldn't be, it could be, but would likely be students spread out throughout the whole continuum of their education. It is worth noting that the district has planned a new school building, and the expansion will increase the district's student capacity by 30%. So our conclusion is we believe that 12 to 18 students would be easily absorbed into the current structure, and that we would have conversations with the school district on any outcomes of that. As a reminder from page 18, they're forecasting $51.6 million to the Brentwood School District over 25 years, so a net increase of about $2 million a year.
And there have been some conversations with the school district, and will continue to be as well with that regard too. I think that answers the question pretty well, Mr. Keith Ravens. I've known you for years. My brain is.
My name's Keith. You can call me that. No, I mean that sounds like what I would tend to guess. I wouldn't expect there to be a lot, but I would say this, and I think I kind of said it the last time, that if things were built to be an attraction to small families and young families, it could be more, and I think that'd be a good thing. Now, I don't know if that's possible, or it's probably not likely, but I think that depends on the configuration of the apartments, it would seem to me. I mean, you keep talking about teachers who work here, and Tony Ponder made the observation that teachers are allowed who, well, it's kind of irrelevant if they live outside the district, but if they live outside the district, they can bring their kids here.
Right.
If they live in a district, obviously they can as well. But my only point would be is that if the apartments were done in ways that would be more attractive to younger families and bring more kids, we do have room for more, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But as a practical matter, these numbers seem accurate to me. But anywhere somebody finds along the way a way to opportunities to increase that, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. So noted.
I think that's something also that we talked about last time too. It's good to have growth, like in a school district, and if a community's not growing, then you're dying. It's like the opposite of that. So I think a lot of foresight with that, and I'm glad to hear, Keith, that it kind of didn't surprise you that the numbers resonate true with you. And my apologies for butchering your last name. I've known you forever. I'm just having a name night tonight. So, Alderman Lockmiller.
And that kind of goes back to my question on number of bedrooms, because if you're building a building that's all one-bedroom units, you're not attracting kids to the school district. But if
Right.
you got 2 and 3 bedrooms, especially 3 bedrooms, you tend to have more family situations in those. So I think at some point that'd be useful to
No,
have that
absolutely.
information.
So it's a real art and science. I would tell you, even within St. Louis County, when you're looking at different municipalities, there is not a rinse and repeat approach to how you do that unit mix. We actually have a couple of different firms we work with that do very detailed market studies at a very granular level, seeing what exists in the market, what exists in neighboring markets, right? How far are people going to travel to want to live in this place? What's missing? What's doing well? What's doing poorly? I mean, you know, around the Grove area as an example, it's a lot of smaller units, efficiencies of 1 bedrooms, because you have a lot of people in the medical school, right? They don't want a bunch of furniture. They don't want bigger ones. You know, our project in Sheboygan, the 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms went really fast. The 1 bedrooms were the slowest. So, right, there's no perfect answer. It really takes a thoughtful approach. And it's, right, our biggest liability if we do that incorrectly. We want to deliver what the market will respond to and need. So we did something a little different in this for you that I hope was useful. So pages 20 to 40, I'm going to skip. What we did is a page for each building. So the bottom, so we did one of these for each. So this is out there for the public also. So at the bottom is the site plan, and then each building is circled. It can be very hard to go back and forth. So the top has the building ID, which phase it's in, what the use is, the stories, the number of stories of the building, not nighttime stories, the number of parking spaces, and then the square feet of that building. So hopefully that was useful. It was useful to us in thinking about it. I'm happy to look at this specifically if you want to, but.
We should go through and spend 5 minutes on each
On each one?
page.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Do you want, that is words or interpretive dance? Do you have
But
a?
that would be nice,
you like
interpretive
that?
dance,
Okay.
that would be lovely.
I might need a
think-
water.
Actually, I read through, right? I read through all of this myself, and it's very nice to have in here. It's helpful, and I think when the public sees it, it'll help them kind of visualize it a little better to see them side by side.
It's a lot to conceptualize. So those tables with those oblique aerials showing the massing, I found to be very useful personally to kind of understand where along Manchester things were. This page is not labeled. I think it's page 41. We did add this map in. This is an ownership map between private owners, the city of Brentwood, the state of Missouri, MoDOT, and then the phase boundaries just as a resource for you all as we're thinking about kind of that acquisition strategy. We're about a third of the way through the presentation. So. Page 42 is the development timeline, did not change, so that's the same. Now we can look at fun pictures though. So if we go to page 44, huge caveat here, and it's on the record for the architect in the room. We wanted to give some ideas for these various building types of what things could look like. This exercise generally scares me a lot because inevitably somebody will tell me they don't like a color of brick. Please don't tell me that. That's not where we're at right now, but we want to give you an idea for when we're working all across the country with different design professionals. These are some of the things that we're seeing, just to give you a flavor.
Planning and zoning will tell you if they don't like the color of the brick.
That would be great. That is a good. So I would suggest we would click through here kind of quickly if that's okay, but just pull on the screen for people on Zoom to be able to see. So the first page are 5 different hotels. We do have a strategic partner that we work with on hotel development. It's not one of our internal core competencies. We're currently working on, I think, 3 hotels with that group. It's what they do, and they're very excited about this project. The next page is multifamily precedent imagery. The top left is called Hugh. That's kind of near Urban Chestnut and the Grove. The top right is called Terra at the Grove. That are both projects of ours. This one's down at Vandeventer and Manchester. And then the bottom 3 are a mix of different building material types. We tried to be careful to represent scale correctly, I will tell you that. So you won't see any 20-story high-rises in here because we're not proposing that. Unless that's what you want, then we could talk about it. Page 46 is townhouse imagery. So the bottom picture is actually a rental type that we're actually just got its occupancy permit today, actually. So this is in the Grove neighborhood. So those are first floor and second floor units, which is different than what we're proposing in Brentwood. The townhouses are 3-story individual units that are for sale product, but we wanted to give you an idea of something that looked a little different. Page 47 is mixed use. So to our point earlier, this kind of gives you more of a district feeling when you're creating congregating space outside for folks. Page 48 would give you a flavor for the entertainment area of what we would envision south of A and an I. So not just kind of a bar restaurant scene, but something that's more experiential, large screens. Jake makes a point of always pointing out that sports in general are still something that our society gathers around, whatever that sport may be. It may be baseball, it may be Olympic curling, right? It doesn't matter. People enjoy gathering to watch these things, so creating spaces is important. We would also envision an outdoor screen as part of that use for special events. Tastefully designed in a way that would not disturb the neighbors. Page 49 are 5 different office precedent imagery. The good news here is we're talking to 2 different, discrete companies where this would be their new headquarters. So for those, it would be very heavily influenced by those users, and they would be nice looking buildings because it's really showpieces for those users. Page 50 is retail. I think they're very pretty buildings. Page 51 are more restaurants. The top left one is Olive and Oak and Webster, which was a Green Street project. That was previously an auto body detailing shop. We actually used state and federal historic tax credits and renewable energy tax credits on that project. If you haven't been there, it's great. We will not be doing any historic rehabs here, though. Page 52. Yeah, Liz could help you with the reservation. Page 52 is some examples of some modern microbreweries and microdistilleries. Urban Chestnut in the top left corner, and then Rockwell in the bottom middle were both Green Street projects. Olive and Oak does have a microbrewery in it, also with Perennial. This gives you a flavor for that. We did include the bottom right image kind of as what the south of A could be in pop-up scenarios. So 53 to your earlier question. So these are 5 actual buildings that have screened parking garages. The bottom left one is Centene's headquarters in Clayton. For a local example, you could go see. I think, are any of these other ones local? I think they are, right?
So bottom right is Edward Jones in Maryland.
So bottom right is Edward Jones in Maryland Heights. So these are local examples you could drive by and see, right? The idea is there's multiple ways to provide ventilation for garages. You can either do it open air or mechanically. You prefer to do it open air, it's just better. And these options do that and also give you, something that's very aesthetically pleasing. It can almost be an art installation.
This is a totally different concept on parking garages, and the front facing, like looking at the site plan, you're going to have, you want to have your units and everything face the pretty things. And so the parking lot would be on the front of the building, but yet that's still on the interior street, not on Manchester. So it's not like what we're looking at these pictures, they're very pretty garages, but it's not going to be on Manchester. It would be set back into the development, correct?
Except for J. But J is wrapped all the way around. So yes, that's correct. Yep.
Okay. And by the way, this one in the upper right looks really cool.
It's really cool, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So we're currently working on several high-rise projects that have really beautifully screened garages. It's amazing the way technology has come along to be able to do systems like this. 54 was hard to really graphically represent in plan form. This is the greenway and public art element. Last time we told you guys about the firm in Montreal that we've been having a lot of conversations with, working with. We envision the parts along the trail that we're responsible for on our property that we're able to do, infilling the green space, really being beautiful things like this. I think you can look at our other projects and it kind of speaks for itself that it's an important piece of what we do. The greenway is such an important resource for the city and for this development that we're excited about that. 55 is just some landscaping ideas for what these big open plazas and general spaces look like. That's the last one. Do you want to go back to any of those?
I said didn't have my mic on. I said on page 1, Alderman Gould.
Since we're just on landscaping, the landscaping that you're proposing here, you all maintain that, and so it's not something that then the city has to take over, landscaping issues and all that? Okay. And then my other question had to do with, and I'm glad we got to the precedent images, the townhomes and the place that you've positioned them in the development. Originally I thought, that's kind of cool, and they could be luxury and looking out onto but they just seem, I don't know, they seem somewhat disconnected from, have you had development like this where you only have 13 and,
So what I would remind you is, and this is difficult, right, to try to put it on paper correctly when you're purely doing a massing diagram. Part of the reason it works well there is the depth of the lot that's there with the contour and the topography. I do not envision that they would be soldier coursed down in a straight line,
Okay.
right? You know, when the architects and are working with the civil engineers and laying out exactly how those lay out, I don't envision that it would look exactly like that. But for trying to explain how blocks and phases works, that's kind of its designated space.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions?
Anyone on the board have any further questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. On the townhomes, what kind of price ranges are you anticipating these are gonna be?
I don't recall exactly what we have those modeled at. When we're looking at that, it would generally be based on what's in the market in general. You know, we would kind of ascertain what comparable things are. So it's just like anything, you can sell it, but you have to sell it for a price. So $400,000 to $600,000 range is what she said, but that's without a designed plan, and those are 3 stories. Do you remember roughly the square footage? All? David, do you have any idea on the size of those footprints? No.
Yeah, it's in the Pittsburgh's individual pages.
Well, I was just kind of wondering ballpark, what's
So we're saying that they're
housing?
20,800 square feet total is the gross square footage. So what's that divided by 13? So they're a little under 2,000 square feet each. Yeah. So a little under 2,000 square feet. I mean, it's really dictated by the market, you know, so there's a lot of different ways you can approach townhouse sales like this. You can do them more custom, where people have the ability to totally customize them however they want, or you can do them in a more standardized fashion.
Well, I guessed that you would have assessed the market to some degree to decide what would fit in there and sell and make sense. That's what I was curious about.
Sure, we believe that that's an important element to at least offer, because you'll have certain people that are in this district that would want to own. So I think it is a piece of the development. It is not a driving factor of it, right? 13 townhouses versus 600 apartments, or the overall commercial square footage, gives us some flexibility in what that final product looks like.
On the senior housing or age-restricted housing, whatever's the proper term.
Active senior.
Active seniors. What are the kinds of things that are different about an apartment there compared to an apartment in one of the other buildings?
I think really the community piece is the most important piece, being surrounded by people that are at a similar spot in life. The amenity package itself, you know, being, you know, a pool, fitness spaces. You know, we're doing more kind of chef's kitchens and common areas now. If people want to have somebody come in and cook a big meal together, not in their apartment. We're doing theater rooms. You know, some projects now have designated like wine storage. So it's really ascertaining which is what's missing and what could really be appealing. So
in the individual apartments sound similar to what you'd find in the other buildings, but the building includes things that,
that's right.
like my wine cellar, you're saying?
I mean, David, do you have any color that you would add of anything specific that you would do differently in a unit at this point? I don't think there's anything dramatically, right? I think when you get into the continuum of care and people who have in-home health or things like that, it obviously gets very specific. You know, you're building to hospital grade kind of standards. You have to do layouts for people who may have, you know, kind of memory care issues, and that would not apply here.
Right. So how would the rent compare to the other buildings?
In our minds, it's currently very similar, right? It's, as we discussed earlier, it's not some of these other kind of senior-focused projects that are exorbitantly expensive is not what we're programmatically discussing here.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I only have one more slide.
Oh, okay.
So the last slide that I was going to point out is, I'm skipping all of the Green Street stuff. So the very last page, we don't need to discuss. Just one of the criteria was a funding letter. So this is just a funding capability letter. Clifton Larson Allen is a firm that we work with on many projects to source debt and equity. So that was that requirement. You want to do it again? That was the dry run. that as presented, that it's financeable.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot about my mic. It basically says, oh, yes, they can do this project, is what the letter says in 2 paragraphs. Thank you, Joel. Do you need a drink of water?
I'm good. I'm like a camel.
Yeah, that's a good thing. So I wanted to ask the question. I know we have things structured here sometimes a little bit differently, and we've done it different ways, different times, and at the Planning Commission, we do it differently. Like, we have public comment for later on the agenda, but I wanted to ask the board what you would think of just having public comment at this point on the project, while everything's fresh in their mind before we go to our discussion and deliberations about what to do. Is everyone in favor? Maybe say aye? Or make a motion? Yeah, why don't we do that? Somebody make a motion if you want to. Have comments now.
Make a motion to add comments at this point in the presentation.
Second.
Do we need a roll call? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Awesome. Motion
Do you mean to
carries.
stay or sit down?
So Joel, you can sit down. What we're gonna do is how we're gonna structure this is we're not gonna do a back and forth with the developer, but what we'll ask is if anyone has a comment or a question to come up to the microphone, because we're recording this meeting so everyone who couldn't be here tonight can see it later. State your name, state your address, and then what question you have, and then you can go ahead, question or comment, and be seated, and we'll make notes, and we'll have Joel pop up or whomever on the team to answer some questions since we have them all here. We just won't go back and forth at this point. And what about Zoom?
Anybody who has
Oh, yes, that's right. And anyone who was on Zoom as an audience member, do we have audience on Zoom? Then they can submit their question, and it'll be relayed by Whitney Kelly, our planning director.
They can submit it via the chat option, or they can do the raise their hand, and we would elevate them so they can speak at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're on Zoom, it's probably really easy to type it in chat. It'll just make it your life easier. So actually, I mean, I see a question on the chat.
Yeah, actually, I think what Alderwoman Sims was saying, it might be easier if we just acknowledge people like we do in the Board of Aldermen meeting then Kelly can allow them to speak and be given the 3 minutes to speak. Because you'll be reading through chats constantly if, okay.
Gotcha. I'm okay with any of that, so whatever in your experience works best. So does anyone have any comments or questions in the audience? Oh, yeah. Go ahead, come on up. Don't be shy. We're glad you're all here. It's a lot of information, and it's a very exciting discussion.
Well, I have many, many questions. My name's Judy Chiodini. I'm at 2616 Cecilia, the lake, if you would know that property. One, traffic. I didn't hear that address at all tonight. Second, when you started this meeting and you said this information is available for the public to come, I'd have to say that I'm on Facebook and Next Door Neighbor, and just by chance, I found this, and then called 6 other people who had no knowledge of it, and that's why we're all here tonight. So I'm a little concerned about that. That would be addressed to, you know, where are you posting it to make sure we can get it out? Cecilia, obviously, you know, is dear to my heart. I can see it with that many people using it to get to other parts of the county. I'd like to know how that would be addressed. Parking on those residential streets, how that would be addressed. Many questions. Okay?
Great.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you for letting your neighbors know as well.
Okay, thanks.
Very appreciated. And Whitney, I might ask you, I know that some of us just in our volunteer capacities have been posting it, like there's a unofficial page that one of the Planning and Zoning Commission members started just because he loves Brentwood. And, different people have posted things on there. Aldermen have posted things on their page. I've posted things. I don't know what the city has done on its social media or not about this. I know there's extensive information on the website. Maybe you could speak to where folks can kind of watch for upcoming meetings so they make sure that they can't miss anything.
Yes, we posted this as part of the agenda for tonight. It hasn't been widely just posted on the city's website because you haven't made your decision yet. So then after this meeting, should you forward the recommendation to the Board of Aldermen, that's when we would forward it for their consideration and make it more public or have it in a more prominent location on the city's website. But we were waiting for your reaction or motion to make the recommendation before advertising it, so to speak. So, but it was on it's part of the agenda for tonight's meeting, the presentation that he just walked through, as well as the development strategies.
So you can link to all that, like for your friends and to tell everyone through the city's website. And then it will be publicized more as we go forward. I also want to mention that with regard to things like the traffic and roads and all of that, we'll get into that really heavily when we get to the Planning and Zoning Commission process. So we have, the 353, and then it goes to the board, and then it comes back to the 353 and the board. And then at that point, it would go, if it gets through all of that, and everybody comes to an agreement and all of that, then it goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and every single street and roadway and signage, anything that's not a state-owned road that we have control over, right? But all the details about the plans and the buildings and traffic circulation on the site and an impact on neighborhoods and all that kind of thing will be gone over in extreme detail by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And based on past experience, there's iterations upon meetings. At a minimum, this would go to a Planning Commission meeting, a site plan meeting, and another Planning Commission meeting. But in my past experience, there's been a lot more meetings than that, and all of those will be publicized and posted as a part of the Planning Commission process. And after we get to that point, all of this would have been disseminated really widely, I think, and you can tell me where I'm wrong, Whitney, that folks will be watching it at that point, so you would know and you would see where it comes along. But those are really great issues that you brought up about the traffic and all of that, and we just haven't dealt with that tonight because it's just not ripe for discussion yet. I really appreciate you mentioning that, and I know I'm on the Planning Commission, and the fellow Planning Commission members, when it gets to us, will be very focused on traffic as an issue, making sure it's not an issue.
I would also like to add, Bola did indicate that once you've made your decision and the Board of Aldermen, we can also be posting the concept and working with the applicant and posting information in the Pulse newsletter. So we will work closely to get it out as widely as possible.
Right, and that's true because we have our own newsletter. So once it gets to that point, it'll get a lot more coverage in there. And of course, Brentwood Bound, which started out as this massive, groundbreaking, just amazing project that the city of the Brentwood took on and that our voters chose to take on to deal with stormwater problems, that's been covered extremely widely. And so now this is like kind of the giant cherry on top of the ice cream sundae. We take care of the water problems and then we end up with this, this wider discussion. So, all right, additional public comments, anyone? And just your name, address for the record.
Hi, I'm Sarah Keating. I'm actually 2610 Cecilia, next to my mother. Great presentation, very well done. You can tell it's a labor of love. So thank you for that. I did have a question, kind of a clarification for you all, because you said that this is like up for your approval to go to the Board of Aldermen. So are we to understand that you guys could say no to this entirely, or is something definitely going to happen and this is the one proposal that was put forth?
So great question. So we don't know for sure if it's going to happen.
Okay.
We put forward this very lengthy RFP process. So,
Sure.
and then we had one response, which was Green Street, and we had the preliminary. There weren't any further responses, so we have this final concept proposal, right? So remember, I used the word final loosely. It's
Yeah.
a technicality, right? So then, once we go from here, if this board tonight chooses to recommend this concept plan and this preferred developer for this concept plan, kind of the master developer, if you will, then that's where PGAV, there's an agreement negotiated where PGAV is paid for and they can do an analysis for us, and we start to get into more details on it. And that's where the Board of Aldermen comes in, and it's just kickstarts the process. So this is like the very beginning. So if we were to recommend tonight this concept plan and this developer as a preferred developer for this area, that doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that clarification. And I'm just, one more follow-up clarification. When it goes to PG and
PGAV, our consultant.
Thank you. Too many acronyms tonight.
I understand.
Especially with what I do as well. I am assuming at that point they will do the analysis on like the other hotels and apartment complexes and senior living area, you know, within like a certain range and what the occupancy is on those, so that to see if it actually makes sense. Because if they're not staying to occupancy, why would we add 2 more, 3 more apartment type complexes?
So 2 things on that. The developers aren't going to add it if there's not a demand, because they would lose money. And this developer isn't selling them off. They're staying invested and managing the property. So that's the first thing to know. The second thing is all of the assumptions that are based around the properties will go into consideration as far as the tax impact and the incentives and all of that. So it's not as direct of an answer to your question, but it kind of gets factored in that way. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think kind of what you're saying is that you guys have already kind of taken that into consideration. That's already probably been done.
And it'll be part of the process as it goes
As it
along.
continues to go
And just
through.
understanding that a developer who's investing this large amount of money, and you heard the amount of cash investment that they said was required.
It was pennies.
Yeah, pennies, right? So they will not, and based on their track record, which is part of what we're looking at as well, and the gentleman who wrote the letter in the back, they're not going to put something forward if it didn't financially make sense, and it has to have a market in order for it to go forward.
Thank you very much for clarifying all that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. These are really good questions, you guys. Who else? And Joel, you haven't had to say anything either.
Hi, my name is Stuart Clark. I live at 2331 St. Clair, and I'm the president of the Brentwood Bound Advisory Board, the Citizens Advisory Board. In a sense, we've been the watchdog on this project since day one for the citizens, to try to make sure that this makes sense and try to tell our fellow citizens we think this is a good deal. Well, here's what we thought was a good deal, spending $90 million on a beautiful park.
Sir, if you could, I
Hooked
know
up with
that
the
you.
Greenway.
I know you want them to hear you, but we need that to be
Okay.
recorded so everyone else can
Okay.
later.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, we really strongly believe that the Brentwood Bound Park was a great idea, and it's going to be so beautiful a year from now. And so we've sort of set the table, and really now is when the hard work starts, is developing from here forward. How do we go forward? How do we make Brentwood a better city than it was before? And that's what, so I welcome all citizens to call City Hall, tell them you want to join the advisory board on Brentwood Bound, come to our meetings, and that way you'll be able to track exactly what's going on. And, but we're excited, we're glad that it's a local St. Louis developer that's here, and I'm kind of excited that they would be the owner and operator as well. So they have a long-term interest in this. And how it gets financed moving forward, I think it really does have to be a team effort. So it's not all abatements, it's not going to be all the city, because we're going to have to maintain it, we're going to have to police it, we're going to have to do a lot going forward. So we want this local developer to also stay with us long-term and really turn this into a really cool space for St. Louis and for the city of Brentwood. So that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one example of the great group and the process that we've had as we've gone along on Brentwood Bound. Who else? Does anyone else have a comment or question? Yes, sir. Name and address for the record, please.
Brad Schneider, 8002 Fawn Court. I was also involved with Stu under his leadership for the Brentwood Bound initial stages, and I had the pleasure of working with many of you. I have hopes and I have concerns. I'll try and keep it to questions. But the biggest question, and I have to differ at least a little bit with the question of traffic's not before us, is as far as I can see, there's 5, maybe 6 kind of anchor points to this project. 3 of them, perhaps the most traffic intensive ones, are right there on the east end where Hanley and Manchester meet, one of the densest intersections we have in St. Louis County. So, as we've all come to appreciate with the current construction, it makes life much more difficult to get around when you can't get from here to there. So I feel like the site plan, you know, while it's all, as you said, you know, by no means actually final and subject to some revision, I feel that there has to be some answers given why this can work with this configuration. Because as the project goes forward, yes, there's tweaks, yes, there's small changes, but this committee, this corporation's recommendation is going to hold a lot of weight. And nobody wants to completely redo a project after it's part of the way down the road. So I'd like to hear some answers as to why things are arranged the way they are. And also whether Green Street has been given access to, for example, the Brentwood Bound surveys that we did, where people voiced what they wanted to see in this area. Because there was no mention of multifamily, there was no mention of a hotel. There was a very strong support for some of this project, for the retail, some of the office space, and yes, the world has changed quite a bit since then. But I did want to know if they had access to that and how they've addressed what the citizens of Brentwood said they wanted, as opposed to what they think should go here. So I look forward to, if this does move forward, participating in the process, but I feel that those are questions that need to be asked at this point.
Thank you very much. And I would say, as far as the survey information, it's out there, but a lot of this went into consideration with the RFP that we put out and what the city was looking for and what we put out to the development community and kind of those discussions as well. And we will still be able to get into a lot of the traffic things, but I would really quickly point out any signalization things, the tunnel that Brentwood itself is doing under Manchester, also helping with pedestrian traffic, and having an internal road circulating on the one side gets a lot of traffic off of Manchester. So just as a quick highlight, I would throw those out, but we'll definitely take that back and continue to address that through the process. Any other questions or comments, sir?
Okay, you're going to hear from the whole family tonight. This is Chiodini David at 2616 Cecilia. I'm really concerned about the density of the situation. We've got a hotel and then 3 different standalone residences, as well as a section of townhouses. Now, if you figure out just from numbers, that should increase the number of vehicles on Manchester by at least 1,000, maybe 1,600 at the top. They said that each residence, not the hotel, but the 3 residences, 200 approximately units. Everybody's got a couple of cars. That really adds up. The other thing I'm also concerned about is you're putting in a lot of impermeable surfaces. Are you going to be adding to a problem that we just thought we created, or just thought we mitigated? There are a lot of parking areas. There are a lot of tops of buildings. You just mitigated a flood problem. Or are you just creating another one? Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And stormwater will be addressed throughout this process as well. Joel? Yes.
Yeah, I would say these are great questions. You don't always get great questions, so we appreciate it. Just two quick touch points. So Carrie Folkenrath is one of the most highly regarded traffic engineers in St. Louis. That's who we generally work with. Absolutely agree, a traffic study would be part of the process once we get into the city. It's a critical piece. Just like we discussed earlier, if we create a huge log jam here, that's bad for us. So absolutely agree with everyone. That's an important piece we'll do. Really the benefit of the internal structure, as you said, is keeping cars in the streets and having complementary uses that aren't all busy at once, right? So it's not like a 10,000 person concert venue where you have 10,000 people coming and leaving all at once. You try to stagger those uses throughout the day. And then sensitivity to stormwater is critical here, especially with all of the effort you all put in place. The good news is MSD is who oversees that, and they are rather onerous in making sure we do things correctly. So what I'd say is you'll actually end up with a better situation for the developed area than you have now with a lot of structures that have no requirements, that don't treat any of their stormwater on site. Water droplet falls on a parking lot and it rolls away with oil straight into the creek. Versus with this, MSD would make us go back to a greenfield standard where we would have to treat and control all stormwater on site, be a heavily engineered stormwater system that would work well with your new system. So I just want to address those two.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I would have anticipated a traffic study as well. So, oh, John, yes, of PGAV on Zoom.
Mute.
I thought it was important to point out in response to the other gentleman's question, there was a special committee appointed, and I think you were on that committee, Sherry, among others, that developed what was called the concept development plan, that in turn was appended, if you will, to the city's comprehensive plan, and then also was part of, I think, every Brentwood bound presentation in terms of what private development might be that was part of this area. So that was out there from the very beginning. The thing the end of this comment is that, frankly, Green Street's plan pretty carefully, I would argue. Yes, there are some differences, but the concept in the development behind their plan mirrors that plan that was developed by that committee. In fact, I think Jeff was on that committee as well. There were residents on that committee. That committee held, what, 6 or 7 meetings during the course of that process. So there is a connection between the planning that was done as part of Brentwood Bound and as part of what was the private development aspect and what Green Street is proposing.
Thank you very much, John. And yes, definitely, that was a long process, and this has been going on a really long time that we were prepping for this, so I really appreciate you pointing that out.
We do have an attendee on Zoom that wishes to participate,
Okay.
Karen Smith.
Okay.
Want an elevator?
Yes, Karen Smith on Harrison. Thank you for that presentation. I thought it was very, very thorough. Just a couple of comments. I think I saw someplace in the presentation that there may be additional fire vehicles that would be needed to support the development. I may have misread that, but if so, I was just wondering if our current fire infrastructure could support that, and whether we would, in addition to an additional fire vehicle, need to think about how we would fund that infrastructure. So I don't know if the current building can accommodate that, or if we would need to put some sort of structure actually down in this area. And then secondly, in regard to the school district, have folks on the continuum of care that would be interested in the facility where you have more senior residents, that would open up potentially homes in Brentwood that would be attractive to families. So we might, in addition to the increased kids that we might expect to see in the housing units built within this development, there could be some additional kids that would be moving into homes that were freed up from, residents that were taking advantage of that facility. And then also, I'd like to see that you're kind of looking into the track record of this developer and kind of looking at their experience. We do have a couple of instances in St. Louis where the developers have taken on a big project and not been able to, bring it through to the finish line. And so just want to make sure, because this is a huge development. I just wonder what would happen if, like, they only got part of the development done, like how that might impact further development on down the road. Like, so if they only got like phase 1 done, like how does that impact the rest of what we might want to do with, with the rest of the area. And then another comment, I appreciate that we're not going to be using any property acquisition on homes, but I also feel pretty strongly that commercial entities, especially those that have been part of the Brentwood community for a long time, would love to be able to see them stay. So if there's a way for them to work into their concept plan and into this development, some of the existing commercial entities that are down there, that would be, I think, benefit to Brentwood, and would definitely not create angst amongst not only homeowners but people doing business here in Brentwood if they feel like at some point in time they won't be considered valuable participants in our community. It just doesn't look good for Brentwood. And then lastly, this is a concept plan. Does it give us the opportunity to change programming down the road? So for example, if you have a particular building in a particular location that's designated for like multi-family housing or a restaurant, is there any discussion or opportunity to look to maybe change that if the city saw that as a benefit to the overall project? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. On the city services, that will be part of the next step. That'll be gone into in quite a bit of a detail, and it would be negotiated in any sort of an agreement. And I might ask, relative to if for some reason the developer, if they were selected and went through the process, wasn't able to complete the development, how this might play out in future phases, and then also about the question about a building and changing its use later or shifting locations as part of, for example, the Planning and Zoning Commission process.
Mark Grimm with Gilmore and Bell. We're representing the city on the negotiations of this project. And on every redevelopment project that's a comprehensive redevelopment, we'll be working with the city to address that question of what if only one phase gets done, and how's the financing work with the multi-phases. So that's an excellent question. You only need to look, if you look at the Boulevard project in Richmond Heights, the developer showed, a lot of nice pictures of a completed development, and here many years later, we've got, one phase still done. And so the city will have to go into it with the discussion of, at the Board of Aldermen level, at the Redevelopment Corporation level, is, under what circumstances are we willing to move forward with this project? Because obviously, the project's going to be finance-driven, market-driven, et cetera. So, yeah, those are great questions that we'll need to discuss very thoroughly and thoughtfully as we move through the process.
Hi, Whitney Kelly. I just wanted to add that this is just the concept, and it will take a multi-year phasing as the applicant proposes. So if some project were to come along and they were not able to purchase the property and someone else wanted to do something, it would be up to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Board of Aldermen to see how that project fits in within this concept plan that we have for the Manchester corridor. Because that is a concern that as they start on phase one, what if something comes in at the end where they're proposing something on phase three? It would still need to be part of the discussion, should that come through, of how it fits in with this whole proposal. And then the Green Street would have to work around that if, within their design as well. So that's further phases as we get into that project.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Are there any other questions or comments? Members of the board? Okay. Yes. So we'll close citizen comments for this portion of the meeting. And have any further discussion with the board members?
I just have
Alderman Gold?
one question, Joel, for you. As far as scope, scale and scope of this project, where does this fit with your portfolio projects that you've done? Is this, say, the largest, or you know, where does this project fall into your continuum?
So I would say this is, that's hard to answer out of my head quantitatively. I would say this is not an unachievable project in the phases that it is, in 3 phases, right? In any market, you're gonna be really careful how much product you put into a market at any given time. So I don't think I'd advise anybody to come build all 20 of these buildings at one time. So if you look at 3 discrete phases, that is very much in our wheelhouse. For comparison, this is about 40 acres, roughly. We have a 65-acre project in Madison we're working on. The Armory District is 21 acres in St. Louis here. So, yeah,
In your wheelhouse is
it's in our
what
wheelhouse,
you're
yeah.
saying, especially when you break it down phase by phase.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe I could comment a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit
sure,
too.
absolutely.
I'm Phil Haltz, the lucky guy that got to found this company many years ago. But I've spent 20 years in the urban environment, actually 25, working with cities. And my first observation here is we have a great partner to work with, and that is not always the case. And we've learned a lot from being in an urban environment and how important it is to really have a community engagement throughout the process, and also to create something that we all can be very proud of. And I think one of the things that's come about as we've traveled down this road is that you can create wonderful environments to bring people together to enjoy their community. And I think that's what we can bring to you, is that in the Grove, where we've spent a lot of time, is we're creating an environment where people come together of all walks. We create great venues for them to enjoy. We create great spaces for them to live, but also we create a community feel. So when you walk in one of our residential, you have a greeting, we have events, we participate in the community in a bigger way, whether it's Grove Fest or bicycle races or the Greenway. So you do that by building trust, you build character, and we work together, and we want people to be out of their cars. This is a wonderful opportunity to change the environment of Brentwood in such a positive way, because you got all this public space that is going to be enhanced with all the amenities that you're creating, but that we will bring, that this will be a destination for everybody to embrace, to enjoy. And part of it is that you want to create something that feels natural and beautiful, and we are very big proponents of landscaping. We got the Great Rivers Greenway team, Chip Crawford, who is excellent at creating public spaces and placemaking, which we are too. And you want something that when you walk up that kind of says hello to you, greets you, and makes your heart warm from inside out. So I think, you know, I love what you're doing, and I think we're the right ones to help you get to that special place with the right users, the right venues, public spaces, entertainment, and we can attract people here that will add value to the community, whether it's office users or people that work in the community. So I think I'm excited about it. I drove down there today and just was in awe of what's about to happen, and it's through your foresightedness that happens. And we typically spend when we come into community, we don't disappear. We're here for the whole long haul. And we've done some amazing projects in the city, the highest LEED certified buildings. We do electric car charging. We do a lot of bike storage. We want people to walk, touch, and talk to each other in many, many different ways. And I think that's what I see the big benefit of what's happening here, is that you've got a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change the fabric of what's here into something spectacular. And kudos to you for taking that big step, because we haven't seen it much in St. Louis. It happens really because everything's kind of been created. You got to back up and start over again. It's hard to do. So that's what we do in our developments. We back up, create these venues. If you come down and look at what we're doing, it's much like you're trying to accomplish here. We do it in a big way. So thank you for the opportunity. And you got a great opportunity here for really changing Brentwood and I think every surrounding community, because you'll be an example.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alderman Plefka?
I just had one question out of time. Keith Slesser, who's a member of our school board, I believe, and way smarter than me, texted me. He tried to get in at the questions, but couldn't make it work for some reason. But he's watching, which is why I called him smart. But he asked, you mentioned before about the $51.6 million benefit to the Brentwood School District over the 25 years. Do you have that broken down by year somewhere? Or is that something we could get access to?
It's actually included in the appendix of the
Is-
document.
okay.
There are tons and tons of tables broken down by tax type and then all of the relevant taxing jurisdictions for
Okay.
each tax type, and then by year. But if they need help specifically just teasing out that data, happy to do that. I know
Okay.
it's a lot to try to process, just from looking at the page.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So do you want to start the discussion with a motion, or what do you want to do? Okay. I'll make a motion, right from the memo from our staff. I move to recommend to the Board of Aldermen that Green Street Real Estate Ventures be designated as the preferred developer of the Manchester corridor as outlined in the request for proposal, and that the Board of Aldermen enter into a funding agreement with Green Street to provide a source of funds to evaluate the Green Street proposal and negotiate potential incentives for the project, subject to appropriate approvals by the BRC and the Board of Aldermen.
Second.
I think I heard Alderwoman Sims as the second first. So motion has been made by Alderman Plefka, seconded by Alderman Sims. Is there any further discussion on this motion?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I want to thank the applicant for what looks like the majority, certainly your high-level people are here tonight. I thought the presentation was thorough. I particularly want to thank the citizens that took time out of their evenings to be here. I think you had great questions. This is a long process. We're just getting started. All of the issues that you touched on are going to be vetted and talked about, and we're going to have plenty of opportunities to kick the tires on this. So I hope that your enthusiasm for attending these meetings and continuing with these questions will continue, because you're going to be an important part of this. This is a long conversation. So I just want to thank everyone's good participation this evening.
Thank you. Took the words right out of my mouth, all of that. Any further discussion, comments by the board? Alderman Plefka?
I would just say I was impressed as well, and I too have concerns about traffic. I have concerns about congestion and the density with which what will be created by this project. But I've been persuaded in our dealings with Green Street and in their presentations, both of them, and in reading the materials and in doing some diligence and looking at their projects around the country and the news coverage of those projects around the country. I'm personally convinced that this is the right developer to make this motion on behalf of, not knowing whether or not this is actually what it's going to look like 6 years from now. but trusting that this developer, as they've said repeatedly from the podium, they're in this for the long haul. They are going to stay. They are going to be owners. They are going to be the people that are going to not only develop, but they're going to manage the properties that are involved here. And I like all of that, and that's really what's got my vote. Sure.
Alderman Gold? Nope. Alderman Lackmiller?
Yeah, I am very impressed with the talent behind this group. I know they were the only ones that stepped up, but I think it's important that we stay with a local developer than having somebody come in from out of state. And I'm very excited about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Huh?
Can I make a comment?
Who
Oh,
said that?
Tony.
Tony, yes. Thank you.
Sorry. I just want to say that I am super excited about the project, and something that really resonated with me was a conversation that my husband and I just had, that I also have young adults, and if they wanted to move back to Brentwood after college, it would be really, really hard for them to do so in either an apartment or a home. So I think that that is a really relevant conversation, and I'm very excited. Great job, guys.
All right. Anyone else? I'll take a point of personal privilege then. This is great. Great presentation. I've been on the Planning and Zoning Commission for 27 years and on this board since it was founded. And this is one of the most impressive presentations that we've had, and love the whole thing that you guys are going to still be a part of it. You know, that you'll be managing the property, that you're not just building and, you know, turning it over to someone else. And that feeling of partnership is so important. So I just want to thank you. And as everyone else said, of course, to the audience, this has been a really heavy citizen involvement from the very beginning for a very long time. In fact, so much so that most people probably don't even remember all the pieces of the process that we've actually had to date. So we'll have a lot more meetings and definitely hope to see you in the future. So with that, if there's no further comment or discussion from the board, I would call for a roll call vote on the motion, please.
Okay. Alderman Gould.
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller.
Yes.
Alderman Plufka.
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims.
Yes.
Tony Ponder.
Yes.
Okay. Keith Ravenberg. Okay. Motion carries. 5 votes, 6-0.
Great, thank you very much. And no, I don't vote unless there's a tie. Yeah. I don't get that privilege. I just took a moment of personal privilege, but. So I know we're going to have a discussion of scheduling the next meeting date. I don't know if staff has any other further things that you want to say as far as like next steps or where we go from here, or anything the developer needs to know.
We will follow up with the developer on scheduling this. The earliest Board of Aldermen meeting would be the August 15th meeting, but we will confirm that with the Green Street team as well, and PGAV if they need any review time prior to that. But I would anticipate it be on the August 15th meeting.
So if folks want to watch the Board of Aldermen notifications on the city's website as far as their agendas, just to reiterate, the earliest possible meeting it would be on the Board of Aldermen would be August 15th.
Correct.
And it could slide from that date depending on needs for more analysis, but start watching the Board of Aldermen agendas for that. So if you want to hear further discussions at the Board of Aldermen, you want to have further opportunity for public input, you know, some of the members of the board are on this commission, but not all of them are. That would be another opportunity, just to reiterate what Whitney Kelly just said, our planning director. Okay, thank you. So as far as our next meeting date goes?
Our next normally scheduled meeting isn't until September 13th. We may have a project for you to review, but we are in early discussion of that, so we will keep you posted. If an item comes up we need to adjust that date, we will let you know and work with you on rescheduling that.
Okay, and that's our annual meeting too, where we have to do our official business.
Yes, so.
So currently it is for September 13th at 6 PM. Probably not as long and not on this topic, though. I mean, we might have a staff update or something like that.
Correct.
Okay. So I know we just did citizen comments. Technically, we have citizen comments now, but we wanted to do it before the motion unless someone is just jumping up like they didn't say anything and they have to say something now. Okay. I think we pretty much exhausted everyone in the room. We didn't tell everybody to bring their lawn chairs and their blankets and their coolers, so. Citizens' comments is closed, and the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.